Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink with a card for you guys using the Studio Katia collaboration with Simon Says Stamp for STAMPtember. This limited edition stamp set and wafer die is only available while supplies last through the month of STAMPtember. So I have the stamp set here and I am inking it up with Simon's clear embossing ink. And I am stamping it onto some distress watercolor paper. And I'd use my anti-static powder tool first. And then I am going to stamp this twice to make sure I get a really good impression. And then I'm going to heat emboss this with Ink on 3's Strawberry Champagne embossing powder, which is basically like a rose gold sort of a color. I'm kind of obsessed with this embossing powder right now. It's so pretty. So I coated the image with that embossing powder, tapped off the excess, and then I'm going to melt all this with my heat tool. Always making sure to kind of tilt it back and forth in the light to make sure that all the areas are smooth and melted, that there's no grainy areas. And if there are, melt those with my heat tool before going on to the next step. And then to color these in, I am using my Karin Brushmarker Pros, which I'm also sort of obsessed with, thanks to Christina Werner. She uses them. We all have to get them, of course. So I chose to do a really intense color on these. So I'm using 2 colors of kind of aqua turquoise colors and then 2 shades of purple for all of these petals. And I'm kind of basically doing like 1 or 2 petals at a time, adding all the color and then blending them together with my little water brush. So I just add the lighter colors first and then kind of add the deeper colors closest to the center and the very edges of each of these petals. Blend them with my water brush, go on to the next one. So I've super sped this up because it's just the same process over and over again until I have all of these petals completely colored in with all of these colors. And I decided to keep all 3 flowers the exact same like colors. And then once those are all colored in, I used sepia for the flower centers. And then for the larger leaves, I'm using 2 shades of green, the apple green and the grass green, and doing the same thing. Started with the lighter green, added a little bit of the darker, and then blended them together with my water brush. And then for the 2 little kind of branchy leaves on the top there, I'm using that same apple green, but then I'm adding a little bit of the olive green just to give them just a little bit of a different look. So after I was done all my blending, I pulled out my Ink on 3 liquid pixie dust, shake this up really, really well to, redisperse all of the sparkle and shimmer. And I just put it on an acrylic block and I'm just picking it up with my water brush and painting this over top. I could have used this during the blending process, but it just depends on my mood. And this time I just decided to kind of paint it over top of everything. It will reactivate, but I find that I'm fine with that. And then let it dry. So I completely coated all of these, the flowers, the centers, and all the leaves. And it gives it so much sparkle. Love. So I will show at the end. I'll turn the flashlight on my phone at the very end of the video to show just how sparkly these are. So after I had finished painting all this on, I set this aside to dry just for a little bit. And then once it was completely dry, I am going to die cut it with the coordinating wafer die. So I'm going to tape the die into place with just some washi tape so that it doesn't move, like it doesn't shift when I run it through my die cut machine. So line that up and I'm going to run it through my die cut machine, and this is going to die cut the outline of the flowers as well as the frame and then remove the centerpiece. So after I'm done die cutting this, I also pulled out the Studio Katia Fancy Scallop Circle wafer die set. And I also pulled out some Tim Holtz Ideology metallic cardstock because the rose gold in that pack goes really well with this embossing powder. So I die cut the frame from that. So I've got this like gold frame or rose gold frame. And I also decided to do some embossing on a stencil because I can't stop. Once you start with this, I can't. I love the look of the dry embossing with stencils. So I have my Platinum 6 machine here, so I just have to have the base, the stencil, my cardstock, the rubber embossing mat that comes with it. I like to add a piece of cardstock as an additional little shim just to get a better impression, and then the purple embossing plate, and then I run this through my machine, and I'm using the Studio Katia grid stencil, so that's going to be dry embossed into this cardstock just to give it that, nice texture. And then once I'm done that, I also die cut some black cardstock with that same fancy scallop circle wafer die set, because there's a little hello wafer die in there. So I die cut that from 3 pieces of black cardstock, and then I'm just stacking those together with Simon's Craft Tacky glue. And then after I'd stacked those, I actually pulled out the Simon Says Stamp Tiny Words stamp set, because I wanted to kind of continue the sentiment and not just have it say hello. So I pulled that out, and I'm just going to ink up there's a little friend sentiment in there. So I'm going to stamp that onto some of Simon's Peacock cardstock, because that went really well with the like aqua colors I used on the flowers. So again, anti-static powder tool. I inked up just the word friend from this one little stamp, stamped it onto there with the clear embossing ink, and then I am going to heat emboss this with that same strawberry champagne embossing powder. And then once that's heat embossed, I'm going to die cut that with one of the sentiment label wafer dies from Simon. So I'm going to die cut all of that, and then I can start assembling my card front. So I have my embossed cardstock, and it's roughly 4 3/4 inches square. I decided to make a square card. I usually only make A2 size cards. It's just habit. But with this frame and then this stamp set and everything, I thought it would be really nice to do as a square card. So I adhered the fancy scallop circle that I die cut from the metallic cardstock with the Craft Tacky glue. And then I'm going to adhere my floral frame that I had colored and die cut just over top. This would also make an absolutely gorgeous like shaker card. These wafer dies, this set, everything. But I decided to just keep it as is and adhere it. Plus I wanted kind of the focus to be more on the flowers. And of course I'm still going to add bling, because why not? So I adhered my sentiments. And then I pulled out some Studio Katia exotic ONYX pearls and rose gold confetti and sprinkled these heavily throughout this card front here. So kind of moved around, put a few here and there, and ended up adding more like as I went along. So I'm just going to adhere all of these into place with more Craft Tacky glue and my jewel picker. So just picking up the pearls and the confetti, and then just putting down dabs of the Craft Tacky glue and pressing these into place. And then once I got what's there adhered, I added a few more. Just, you know, why not? You can never have too much bling, in my opinion. So after I got all of these adhered, I'm going to make my card base. So since this was, like I said, roughly 4 3/4 inches square, I cut down a piece of Simon's 120 pound white cardstock to 5 inches by 10 inches. So I'm going to score this at 5 inches. So this will be a top folding 5-inch square card. So I used my Teflon bone folder and my score buddy, scored that, creased the fold, and then I want to add something to the inside, of course. So I'm going to put this into my MISTI, and I am going to line up the stamp image again from the floral frame set. I'm going to center that onto the inside of my card, close the lid of my MISTI to pick that up, and then I'm just going to ink this up with those Karin Brushmarker Pros. These weren't designed for stamping, but they work just fine in my opinion. I could see where I was placing the color, but if you have trouble with that, or just depending on the lighting some days, I'll put a piece of like white copy paper underneath the lid just so I can see where the color is going. But I just scribble on the color from the brush marker. I'm using the same colors I used to watercolor the image for the front of the card, and I'm working lightest to darkest. So I use like my light turquoise color, my light purple color, and then I'll add the dark purple and the dark turquoise, and then the brown, and then go on to the greens. And I'm just like adding them in the same areas where I colored them. So keeping the purples to like the centers of the flowers and the aqua colors to the edges of the flower petals. I use the brown for the top part of the frame, and then the centers of the flowers, and then the greens for the leaves. So just went along and filled this in. I never usually worry too much about it being perfect. I just like having, you know, that color and the ghost of the image, as it were, on the inside of the card. But this actually turned out even better than I thought it was going to. And again, it was one of those things where it turned out so well, and I was like, oh, this would make a really good card front. So yeah, it's always funny sometimes when it turns out better than I expected, and then it's like, oh, you know, missed opportunity in a sense, but why not? You could totally do this. I'm also curious if you stamped this and then maybe colored it in as well, like kind of almost did a no line sort of a thing. Like, I need more hours in the day because now I'm just curious, but stamped it. It's stamped perfectly. I did lightly mist it with water, just a very light mist with my Nuvo mist bottle, like my spray bottle, just to kind of reactivate any of that ink before stamping it. And then I stamped the Thankful Sentiment that comes in that floral frame set with some VersaFine Clair Onyx Black ink. And then I added one more little tiny sentiment from the Tiny Words stamp set, so it'll say thankful for you. And I inked up just the for you words of that stamp, stamped that onto the inside of the card. So now the inside is done. To finish the outside, I'm just going to adhere my embossed and blingy and shiny and sparkly card front to this card base with more of the Craft Tacky glue. And then once this is adhered, this card is done. And as always, there'll be a link below the video to my blog post. There'll be a supply list with links to all the supplies that were used. Like I mentioned, the floral frame set is limited edition for STAMPtember, so only while supplies last. So if you're interested in this set, there will be links to everything down below as always. Thank you all so much for watching, for subscribing, for thumbs upping and commenting. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all very soon in another video. Bye!